Hello YouTube. Today we're going to take a look at a slip joint knife from Great Eastern Cutlery. This particular model is from the Northfield unXld brand. Great Eastern actually produces knives, at least within their own company, under 3 different brand names. Titty Cutlery, Great Eastern Cutlery, which is, I guess you could call it the home brand, and Northfield unXld, which is their top-end product. Now, unlike a lot of other knife companies, Great Eastern doesn't make a good, better, best. Really, the quality of their knives, and when I say quality, I'm talking about how things fit together, how the handles meet with the bolsters, the walk and talk of the blades, the lockup. That is consistently superb throughout all 3 brands. Now, they do produce some what I call private label knives for a few different companies. Cripple Creek is one of the ones that they've done that for. I think they even did some for Schrade and possibly 1 or 2 others. But the pattern we're going to talk about today is a fairly new pattern. It was released in 2012. It's a variation on a trapper theme, and I actually find it very interesting. It's, for those of you that are familiar with the Great Eastern product line, it's similar to the pattern number 73 in a 2-blade. So that's kind of the point of reference for this. One of the things I do like about Great Eastern Cutlery is their packaging. All of their knives ship in a tube, and it doesn't matter what brand we're talking about, whether it's TU, GEC, or Northfield, all of them ship in this tube. It's a little impractical to store, but I actually really like it. I like the artwork on the labeling. It kind of has I'm going to say a 1920s and 1930s era vibe, which, if you go back and you study the history of slip joint knives, which by the way is very, very fascinating, that is kind of where it all really came together, was in the early 1900s, even the late 1800s. A lot of the knife companies that produce knives in that era are gone. There actually was a Northfield company, and they've been gone for many years. But GEC has acquired the trademark, and that's what they label their premium, which is what it says here, series knives as. This particular 74 is done in Natural Stag. And one of the things that I also like about their packaging is that they'll put this informative label on the back. And the label talks about how GEC selects their stag, processes it, really kind of how they do what they do when it comes to stag-handled knives. And I've owned literally hundreds of slip joint knives. I've been collecting them for the better part of 40 years. And no one does stag-handled knives better than Great Eastern. Not Case, not Queen, nobody. Until you get into the custom level, which would be like a T.A. Davison or a Brett Dowell, you're not going to get better selected stag for the knife. Another kind of cool thing about GEC is that they wrap their knives in this wax paper, and for the knives that I don't carry as users or EDCs, EDC stands for everyday carry for the uninitiated, I like to store them this way, and the wax paper provides quite a bit of extra protection. And they're the only ones really doing this. I think Bear and Sun Cutlery might do it, but really we're kind of talking apples and oranges, even though Bear makes slip joints. But Case, Queen, Canal Street all have nice products, but they ship their knives in this really fragile tissue paper that, aside from the initial packaging at the plant, doesn't really last very long. Whereas this wax paper holds up fairly well. So that's, at least in the closed position, the general shape and look of the 74. This is the pattern 74. Couple of things right off the bat. The bolsters are nickel silver. They are fluted at the front and crowned. The crowning is this rounded and radiused portion of the bolster. They have brass liners and polished steel back springs, brass pins. All the pins on this knife are perfectly set. The hafting is perfectly executed. I also like, one of the best things about GEC is their attention to detail is generally several notches above. I think everybody, with the possible exception of maybe Queen's Shat and Morgan series, but the polish and how the back springs fit all the way through is pretty much perfect. I mentioned that this knife was a two-bladed knife. You can see there, or I don't know if you can or not because my camera's not that great. They are perfectly centered. The blades are perfectly centered inside their slots. Absolutely perfectly centered. The knives feature a half stop, which I like. I do consider it a safety device. And the walk and talk, or the lockup, the snap, that's what all those terms are used to describe quote-unquote walk and talk on the Northfields and Great Eastern Cutlery knives are fantastic. I mean, they run real close to being nail breakers, but that's what you want. Not a nail breaker, but real close to it, so that when the knife is in the open position, the blade will stay open. I mean, there's a reason why slip joints have kind of lost a little bit of their popularity compared to the modern locking knives. And the modern locking knives simply are safer, that's a fact. But for general daily use, cutting open mail, packages, cardboard, string, yarn, food, peeling an apple, slip joints work perfectly well. I've never had a problem with them in decades of use, as long as the lockup is like it is on the GECs. Victorinox is literally, I've carried a Victorinox Swiss Army knife for 40 years, and they work brilliantly because Victorinox gets that importance of that lockup. Whereas, I'll use Buck as an example. Buck makes some neat knives, don't get me wrong, but when it comes to slip joints, their back springs are entirely too weak, which makes their knives, even though they're attractive and I like them, they're unusable. And I've had several Bucks for years. In fact, my first slip joint was a Buck. I still have it. But it just lacks that pop that locks open. Now, another important feature to the GEC product, and this knife is a great example, is that when in the open position, the blade tang and the back spring fit tight without any gapping or radiusing. If you look there, and again, I don't know if you can see it in my crappy camera, but that is perfectly flat. This particular main blade is a saber ground, which I like. I think it's very aesthetically pleasing. It has beautifully ground swedges, the Natural Stag unXld etching on the blade, beautiful bright polish, nice and sharp. It's just a gorgeous blade and very practical. That blade shape there for me works as well as anything I've ever encountered, and I love it. Great stuff. Secondary blade, half stop on that as well. Beautiful lockup. This is a Warncliffe. It is also a saber ground. Beautifully done. super attractive. For piercing tasks like opening mail, this works beautifully. It's, for some cutting tasks, not an ideal blade because of its flat, straight edge. But for piercing tasks, it works wonderfully. And it says Titusville Ironworks on the back of the tang there. Just a beautiful blade. Another thing I'll mention here in terms of GEC's quality, that shield is pinned in, not glued. And over hundreds of slip joint knives, to be fair, I've only had one glued in shield fall off. I've never had a pinned on shield come off, and that's because the pinned on ones simply are better. That doesn't mean I won't accept a glued on shield. In fact, I have a number of case knives and charade knives and a few others where the shields are glued on and they've never come off. I did have a Queen knife, ironically enough, and a lot of their shields are pinned on, but this particular knife, and it was a mini trapper, the shield was glued on and it came off. That's my one and only knife which has had a problem with the glued on shield. Other than that, it's a great knife. All the other facets of the knife work beautifully, very well made, but it just couldn't handle the shield being glued on, or perhaps it wasn't glued on right at the factory. I mean, it's, manufacturing is one of those things where perfection, there are a lot of little variables that get in the way of achieving. When I say perfection, I'm not just talking about individual knife quality, but overall quality, over the tune of however many knives that company makes. Again, if you look at the Natural Stag scales, perfectly matched. And again, that's one of the things GEC does so well. This knife is serial numbered. GEC's knives are produced in small runs. You could call them semi-custom knives because there's that much handwork involved in them. But as Greg from TSA Knives says, just because a knife is serial numbered doesn't mean that the GEC knives that don't have a serial number aren't as collectible. Sometimes GEC will do very small runs to use up leftover material, and I have a few of the knives that were produced that way. They typically don't have a serial number, but yet end up being some of the most collectible GECs. Pretty amazing stuff. So there you have it. The Model 74 Saber Ground Trapper. Beautiful, beautiful knife. Northfield unXld by Great Eastern Cutlery. If you haven't gotten into collecting slip joint knives, you got to check it out. That's where it all started. I certainly love my modern folding knives and quote-unquote tactical knives. I enjoy them just as much as I do the slip joints. But the variety of patterns, handle materials, steels, all that stuff, and the incredible history that's associated with slip joint knives makes collecting these a real joy. That, and there's a real great community out there of slip joint knife collectors. You get to interact with some absolutely wonderful people. So there you have it. Hope that piqued your interest. Take care and have a great day.